Lijep pozdrav u još jednom UNIDU intervjuu. Ja sam Ivana Hladilo. U studiju nam se pridružila izvanredna profesorica, doktorica znanosti Jasmine McNealy s Fakulteta za novinarstvo i komunikacije Sveučilišta Florida. Ovaj razgovor vodit ćemo na engleskom jeziku. Hello, professor, and welcome to our TV studio.
Thank you.
This is your first time in Dubrovnik and in Croatia. What are the first impressions?
Very beautiful city, very nice people. Happy so far, yeah.
Happy to hear that. You are an attorney and social scientist. You are studying media and technology with focus on law, privacy, and data governance.
Yes.
How did you first become interested in these topics?
It's interesting because I was a journalist. I did, reporting for local newspapers, but also did editorial design, the newspaper as well. But when I was writing my dissertation and studying towards the dissertation, I was looking at how journalists would get unlawful information. And many times they would get information, both papers and electronic records, through means that if they weren't journalists, usually they'd be thought of as hacking or theft or unlawfully recording people. And that led me into thinking more about the technological side and the data side of technology and media.
So that brought you here.
Yes.
What concerns you the most today about the way society uses technology?
So I think there is a hype surrounding innovation. And we like innovation, right? Innovation can bring efficiency, it can bring productivity, and those are good things to a certain extent. On the other side, though, we don't really examine the not so beneficial or actually harmful implications of using certain technologies. So the data collection and then how it can be used by other parties, so third parties and others for harmful results. We don't think about who's left out of the audience for data, even if they are affected by the technology. And we don't think about long-term, what are the implications of continued use? And that's not just for what we think about as the news or information ecosystem. That means what are the implications for climate and water and how people live and function in communities.
Speaking about collecting and using data, how are even systems collecting personal information of people, of users on the internet?
So several different ways that systems collect information. Of course, we think on the surface, we think about if you use, say, social media, we think about what information that you readily disclose. Hey, I'm at the port of Dubrovnik and I'm eating lunch, right? So you readily said your location. But sometimes you don't have to say it because a organization, a social media organization or another organization can just have your location data automatically turned on for them to collect. Your social media data, they may have cookies still. If you don't manage your cookies, they can place cookies to see what are the other sites and apps that you are using to navigate or entertain yourself. There's every time you like something or repost or reshare. And all of these things are data from which a organization can process and then make inferences or predictions about you to usually try to sell you something, a product or a service, but also to place you into categories, right? And it's not just the immediate, in this case, social media organization that uses that data, but that organization sells access to that data to various other organizations who use it to place you into categories and continue to make these predictions or inferences about you. And that has implications for things like insurance, sometimes employment, banking and finance. So all of these systems are starting to be connected and stacked on each other. And that's harmful and possibly dangerous for how we live our lives and our autonomy over being able to keep certain information separate from each other.
And can like ordinary citizens do something concrete to try to manage to protect the information, personal information?
Yeah, I mean, so there are things that people can do themselves when they're using systems or choosing not to use systems for that matter. But sometimes you just have to use systems or you're at a disadvantage when you don't, right? So if you're going to use a social media system, I would say at a minimum, you know, enhance some of your privacy settings, right? Turn off default, turn off data collection, and make sure you know what it is that's being collected about you and being disclosed. Now, I say all that, and I still say that it shouldn't be on the individual to try to protect themselves from these huge organizations that have so much power. And so I would say also regular people should petition their policymakers to really make better, more adequate policy regarding platforms and the kinds of data they collect. And not just for the huge usual suspect organizations, so Meta or Facebook and Google, right? We know they do stuff. But there's also the smaller ones that we don't really pay attention to because we don't think that they're doing anything necessarily wrong, but they are collecting data. And again, that data can be used for these purposes that are not necessarily beneficial to us. And so making sure and petitioning our policymakers to make better data protection and privacy and other related technology-oriented policies is a really good thing.
But on which way can some ordinary citizen try to force, let's say, policymakers? Sure. How can we do that?
So I wouldn't say try to force, but I would say that there's an opportunity to engage in local policy, and even regional policy by joining with other groups that organize and lobby policymakers, writing letters, op-eds. Those kinds of things are effective political engagement, and they do move the needle for policymakers to at least attempt to do certain things regarding privacy, data, those kinds of things.
What would you say are even ordinary citizens, people in general, aware of how many information companies do have about us?
It's really hard to be aware of. There's just so much information that can be points of data that can be collected about you to shape who you are, or at least who the machine says you are. I don't think most people can even begin to understand. And I don't think even the experts have even begun to understand the sheer volume of descriptors that can be collected in the data about each individual person. And so that's even more of a reason that we need adequate policy regarding data collection and processing.
Speaking about adequate policy, what do you think? Who holds the real power today, policymakers or big tech?
Right now, big tech does. I think policy takes a long time, and it's unfortunate. We want good policy. At the same time, the sheer time it takes for the policy process to go on means during that time, big tech is still working. Big tech is still working in ways that are potentially and confirmably harmful to people. And so right now, big tech is in the driver's seat, I would say, regarding data and how it's used and what it's used for, even if there are significant legislation like GDPR, like the AI Act, like the Digital Services Act, that are there that offer some protections, but there could be so much more because of the possible harms from those data.
To what extent are laws and regulations managing to keep up with rapid technological change?
Yeah, because it takes so long for the policy process to happen, law and policy is inherently behind. Now, there's ways to like future-proof, and that involves the use of certain kinds of language and those kinds of things, but it takes a lot. It still takes the policy process, and so inherently policy is behind, but I still believe that there's a way to make better policy. So when it actually is enacted, then organizations and individuals to a certain extent, but organizations have to almost immediately change their business model. Yeah.
Artificial intelligence.
Yes.
It's growing faster than regulations can follow. What happens like when things go wrong? Who is responsible in that situation?
Yeah, in my opinion, the responsible parties involve the organizations that deployed the artificial intelligence system, but also it is possible that the creator of the system, they don't have to be the same person, same organization, I should say. It is possible to me that the creator, the original creator, developer of the AI system can possibly have some responsibility in the harm that happens, because ultimately they are the creator of the system, and ultimately they understand or should understand the data, the training, the creation of models, and the values that are inherently in the creation of that AI system.
How to prove that?
Yeah, it's difficult, but AI is a data-based system. So we look at what's the data set? Where did it come from? How was this data extracted? Was it cleaned? Was it contextualized or decontextualized? So there are various questions in audits that have been created that can point to this organization knew or should have known what could possibly happen.
You are the founder of the Infrastructure for Communities, Ecology for Data. That's a hub at your university's college.
Yes.
What is the focus of this hub?
Yeah, that's a great question. So ICE Labs, or the ICE Hub, the focus is on thinking about how people and communities interact with technology or emerging media and the implications for those interactions. What does it mean for people to understand how their data is collected? What does it mean for people to either engage with artificial intelligence or decide not to engage with artificial intelligence? And can they even make those choices? What about people from different geographies, right? So we talk about different countries, but we also talk about the different geographies within a country. So rural communities versus more urban communities. So it's really about people and the implications of technology for people and how people can play a role. And also we want to know with more accuracy or greater accuracy how people engage with technology so that we can make better policy. Right? So it's one thing to say this policy is going to do this and it's going to change all of this, but if the policy is based off of a faulty idea of how people interact with the system, it's not going to really be helpful. So we want to know how people actually behave and actually interact so that policy can be made and that policy is actually good policy.
Do you already have some results?
I don't know if we have some results. I think we've had some discussions that have involved policymakers. We've had some publications that we hope the policymakers have read, right, and engaged with. And we're just going to move right along and hope that we make dents and we spark conversations. Yes.
What are the projects that you at the Hub are working on at the moment?
Yeah, one of those projects is the Rural AI and Policy Project. And the idea is to consider rural communities within the larger conversation about artificial intelligence and deployment of artificial intelligence systems. I think a lot of the conversation and the even media coverage of artificial intelligence comes from a very urban viewpoint or perspectives. We talk about like facial recognition in cities and the use, but rural communities are facing similar things, or they're also excluded from the conversation on artificial intelligence. And part of that is infrastructural. Like, do they have good broadband or Wi-Fi signals? But why? And if you're saying that AI can be useful in other contexts, can it be useful also for the rural context? But it also begs the question as to what are the other implications of artificial intelligence for rural communities, including labor or jobs, including climate and environment and water quality, and including things like healthcare and all of those things that have really significant implications for how people are able to live and sustain their lives in rural communities. So that's a huge exploration that we've been doing so far. Yes.
I have seen that you have spoken about dark patterns.
Yes.
It sounded really interesting to me, but for those who are not familiar with the term, what are dark patterns for the beginning?
Yeah, so dark patterns are designs used either in your apps or online, and sometimes offline as well, that encourage you or get you to do something that you otherwise wouldn't do, but for the design, but for the dark pattern you encounter. So that means you go to a website and there's a pop-up that covers the screen that says, hey, put your email address in here and you'll get 10% off or whatever, get this newsletter. And you try to find the X, but the X is a different color, so it's really obscure to X out until you feel forced to put your email address or some email address in to get that off the screen, right? That's a dark pattern. And it seems kind of benign, right? You're just giving up your email address, but that's still getting you to do something that you wouldn't otherwise do. More, I guess, significant dark patterns would be you go to buy something online and they place something extra in your cart that you have to pay for. And you didn't recognize it because you didn't put it in the cart. And you just believe that you only have things in your cart that you put there. If you're not paying attention, you're going to pay some extra money that you wouldn't want to do. Lastly, another example of a dark pattern would be being able to subscribe to content online, whether it's a newspaper or a streaming service, but being very difficult to unsubscribe. So you can't find the unsubscribe link, or they actively say you have to call them to unsubscribe versus being able to unsubscribe online, right? The idea is to make it more difficult for you to get out of the subscription service and they continue to make money off of you where otherwise you would be away from them, right? That's another example of a dark pattern.
Speaking about dark pattern, data collection, and privacy in general, do you think there is a possibility to have privacy in the future in this environment where the world, let's say, is led by algorithms?
I think there's a possibility for that. I think how we define privacy maybe needs to be really reconsidered. I think people still have a right to privacy. I think their privacy is still alive, but just our idea that privacy is total control is not as valid, and quite frankly has never been valid, because we go outside, we interact with other people, we disclose things. That's just the nature of humanity, right? Being social, and part of being social is disclosure of information. And once you disclose certain things, you have absolutely no control over whether that other person or those other people are going to communicate about it. Now, usually you can say there's a social contract, a lot of different things, but you really have no control over information. I'd say the same thing with certain kinds of technology. At the same time, I see the true possibility for policy to offer infrastructure for privacy, infrastructure for obscurity as far as who we are in certain ways. And those policies can make it very difficult for commercial actors and even non-commercial actors to collect this data and use it in ways that we don't want it to be used. And I see that in the future, that's going to be one of the most significant parts of a policy with regard to people and data, especially with regard to artificial intelligence. Speaking
about policy, if you could offer one message to policymakers, what would it be?
So policymakers where? So if I was in the United States, I'd say we really need an omnibus federal privacy or data protection act. We're so behind. We really need that. If I would say to policymakers worldwide, I would say that there needs to be some shared principles regarding artificial intelligence, but also, and perhaps more significantly, about the data collected to feed artificial intelligence, both where it's coming from. A lot of it is gathered in an extractive manner from communities in the global south or the global east, depending on what we're talking about. And there's no way for many of those people to actively refuse because of how infrastructure is and the way that tech organizations have engaged with governments and certain communities. But I would say globally, policymakers really need to be considering creating a shared lexicon of policy and policymaking mechanisms to protect people's personal data, and not just individuals, but community data as well.
Speaking about community, your focus, research focus is also on communities.
Sure.
How can technology further marginalize communities, and what can we do to prevent that from happening?
Yeah, so technology can further marginalize communities in that, so data is never just for the individual or about the individual. Data is always a networked object. It always points to other people when it points to one person. And so that's the community. And there's also ways of thinking about community where it's people who share affinities, people who share, genetic dispositions, people who share diseases, or people who put themselves in communities as well. And so how organizations can both place people into communities, but they could also target specific communities, and there are implications for both of those. And I think that one, law needs to recognize the communal nature of data and what it can mean, not just for one person saying, okay, you can use this data, but what it means for the wider communities if even one person shares data or is allowed to give consent for data. And also, I think that how tech organizations can, again, categorize people is a community issue, and that some categorizations can be harmful, and policy needs to deal with that as an issue as well.
My final question is, should we fear technology itself or the way we use it?
Yeah, I don't think we should fear technology itself. I think we should be very concerned with the values that are baked into certain technologies and with the way and the organizations that deploy technology. So there are some technologies that we know are error-prone, very error-prone, and they haven't been corrected. Facial recognition technology, for example. And then we also know that there's other technologies or systems of technology that are harmful to the environment. So data centers, for example, water extractive, water polluting, energy sucking. And so we know that. And we also know then that baked into those systems are values about the environment, value about whose environment gets to be ruined, I guess, is the way it is. And so because we know those values and those values are harmful, we need to be concerned about those values specifically. And so policy can deal with values, And I think it hasn't done that yet with respect to certain technology. So now, not being afraid of the tech, but being concerned, very concerned about the values inherent in tech and the organizations that are deploying those.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Professor, for your time.
Thank you.
Bila je ovo izvanredna profesorica, doktorica znanosti Jasmine McNealy s Fakulteta za novinarstvo i komunikacije Sveučilišta Florida. Ovim smo došli do kraja još jednog UNIDU intervjua u kojem vas je vodila Ivana Hladilo. Lijep pozdrav!